Pops in a pod. Pops in a pod.
Hey everyone, Peter Pop here.
And Nadir Pop here.
Nadir, what a year it's been, right? I mean, I can't believe that we're already at the end of the year in December. And I can't believe how quickly the year has passed by.
No, absolutely, Peter. Considering the fact that we were very much still a part of the entire pandemic and the lockdown, but we still ended up doing such interesting things. It wasn't just, the same thing that we did in the previous year, but we really went out and tried something very new and very interesting with Pops in a Pod.
Yeah, and if you've been on social media in the last couple of days, right, you would have definitely come across the Spotify campaign Wrapped that they do in the end of the year. And everyone's, of course, sharing their music taste, what they've been listening to. Oh, interesting thing about that I read is how parents, their entire Wrapped campaign has been messed up with, the usual suspects. You know what I'm talking about, right?
It was actually very funny. I remember, Peter, you sent that link and I just opened it and I was like, okay, I think it's something funny and let me just go through it. And wow, I think it was one of the best things I read that day because I was having such a bad day and that really put a smile on my face. And I think it's our story also because obviously kids at that age, toddlers 4-5 years old, don't have their own phones. So they depend on their parents, right? To kind of listen to whatever that they want. And it's funny. I mean, Peter, I can totally imagine your case. You have your own metal podcast, right? Heavy metal podcast. I know the kind of music you listen to, but I'm pretty sure your number one song on your Spotify list would be, what, Peppa Pig or something?
So I kind of got away with that because I give my son YouTube, which I don't want to see what my most listened to
very
on YouTube
clever.
is. But why am I talking about the Spotify Wrapped campaign? Well, we're podcasters, right? And one of the platforms, if you're listening to us on Spotify, high five. But just some of the data that we got from there, and I think we've shared on our social media also. I just wanted to do a quick wrap up of that, right? And just kind of quickly go through. So I'm not sure if you remember, Nadir, the first episode we did this year was Parenting in Cobra Kai Part 2.
And Peter, I don't know about what the world thinks. I love that show. I binge that show. And yes, apart from the entertainment aspect, a lot of parenting lessons, especially from a dad's perspective. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we picked it up.
That started off the entire streak of 45 episodes that we've done from Jan to November. And believe it or not, we've released 2018 minutes of podcast episodes. So that's quite a bit if I think about it, right?
No, most definitely. I think we put in a lot of effort, Peter, and I think both of us deserve a pat on our backs for doing this.
Yeah, and another cool thing I found was that while the podcast was listened to in 19 countries, this year for the first time we had listeners from Philippines, Malaysia and Netherlands. So if you're listening to us from either of those countries, a big high five and welcome to you.
Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate the fact that you all listen to our episodes, and I'm sure whatever the connection is, we really hope that you keep listening and you pass it on to your friends and family as well.
Yeah, and just to quickly round up some of the data I found, right? What's great, and I think kudos to both of us for doing the podcast year on year. When I was looking at statistics from last year, we've got 80% more followers, 42% more listeners, 35% more hours listened, and 7% more streams. But you know what's the kicker? And I think this is a big shout out to all these 151 people who actually listen to our podcast more than any other podcast. So big shout out to all 151 of you.
Thank you so much, and we are hoping that you guys are also parents, and good luck with that journey. And if you all are not parents, then wow, I think we're doing a great job with the content that even non-parents are listening to us.
Yeah, but that's at least just for Spotify, right? And I thought just some of that data that we got from Spotify was really cool. But definitely looking at towards the end of the year looking at the other platforms like Apple, Ghana, JioSaavn, just some of the data in there, because, this is a labor of love for both Nadir and me. We're doing this in addition to our day job. So it's really satisfying to just see all of these statistics at the end of the day, right?
True. But Peter, let's leave the numbers aside. Why don't we tell our listeners what is it that we are doing in today's episode? What is so exciting about today's episode?
So I thought, since we talked about all these numbers, and this is again listener data, right? I thought let's just keep this episode between the two of us, and let's us kind of retrospect or look back at the year gone by and just some of the episodes that we did, because, we've done so many episodes. And when I was looking, I couldn't believe it had been 45 episodes in just a matter of 11 months. Here's the first one, Nadir. And I know this is a tough one, but I'm putting the gun against your forehead, and here it goes. All these 45 episodes that we did, right? What's one episode that you think everybody who's listening to this episode should listen to?
It's almost like asking a parent who's your favorite child, right?
I knew that was coming.
But every parent, let me break this myth. Every parent has a favorite child, whether they admit it or they don't admit it. I think that's why we've stuck to one. So that for all our lives we can say, yeah, you're the favorite child because there's nobody else. Okay, coming back to episodes. I personally love the story of our 75-year-old podcaster Neela Ingleji, right? Who started her podcast journey during the pandemic. And she narrates stories and other long-form articles by getting, their licenses, speaking to the authors, and so on and so forth. Correct? And I think that's just such a wonderful story that, in spite of doing her engineering and teaching and all of that enthusiasm of doing something interesting never died out, right? And she just continued to do this, and she did whatever she wanted to reach that point in producing her episodes, and obviously her daughters did help her in whatever way. But today, she produces, she records, and she edits all by herself. So I feel Neela Ingleji's episode should be listened by our viewers. And
bonus is, if you really want to hear Nadir and me both talk an entire episode in Hindi, well, go back and listen to that episode. Don't worry, we're going to put the links to all these episodes in the show notes.
So, Peter, which episode do you think that our listeners should definitely listen to, the ones that we produced last year?
Just to preface it, right? We came up with the idea for entrepreneur parents last year, and I think, if I'm not wrong, we have over 10 parents that we featured in the episodes. And it was really cool, right? Just kind of learning about their journey, the way that they've started their businesses in there. But the one that I think everyone should definitely listen to is the one with Pritesh Asher from Juicy Chemistry. And honestly, the reason why I really like that episode and I want everyone to listen to it, right, is because he so openly talked about the failure in his family business, right? Like, normally these are one of those things, if you think in Indian society, no one talks openly about.
I agree.
And he just kind of let it out there, spoke about it, shared with all our listeners. And I think when you go back and listen to it, right, I really feel the conviction, because what he learned from there really kind of made him the person that he is today and kind of helped him in his journey with Juicy Chemistry. So I definitely think that's one episode that you should listen to. I know, Nadir, I said one episode, but I'm going to break the rule. And I think for some reason you're going to agree with me on this, that it's fine if we break the rule on this.
I know which episode you're talking about, Peter. And I'm sure you'll agree, it's Chitra's episode.
The episode we titled 3 Moms and a Kid, right? And it's such a unique story. And I'm so grateful to Natasha Kinney for, a friend of mine, of sharing that story with us and saying that, hey, you know what, maybe you should get Chitra on the podcast. And I'm really happy that we happened to do that episode, right? We went in with, I think, 0 expectations. And by the end of the episode, we were all just so excited and happy. So yeah, that's some episode I think everyone should definitely listen to.
I completely agree, Peter. It was an eye-opener. We were completely wrapped with attention And that was one episode I think both of us were just like, wow, it is such an incredible story. And you've mentioned unique, most definitely, because I just feel that stories like this, especially in our country, needs to come out. And I'm so glad that she came on our platform, right? She could have gone anywhere, but she came on our platform. She chose us. And I would personally like to thank her to show that kind of confidence. And I would definitely urge our listeners to go and listen to her episode, which is episode number 88, 3 Moms and a Kid.
Okay, now that we got the tough one out of the way, here's another one for you, Nadir. What is one episode that really surprised you the most?
You know, Peter, after having produced 105 episodes, you would live with the assumption that as a parent, you've probably covered the entire gamut, right? Let's leave learning aside, but at least you're aware of certain things. Maybe not in depth, but you're aware. And that is why episode 104 and 105 by Dr. Rakesh, The Science of Dads, that really took me by surprise. And I was like, oh my God, that's a whole new universe we were just completely unaware of. And wow, what a conversation.
Yeah, I can't believe we did 2 episodes. I'm pretty sure by the end of that conversation, we had material for at least 4 or 5 episodes. So I'm definitely thinking that we have a lot more in there. But personally for me, right, just like you said, you think you know so much. And I've been involved with music in India for over 10 years, like independent music, right? And somebody who I kept coming across every few years when his band Swaratma released new music was Jishnu Das Gupta. So when we decided to, do that episode in Feb, where we brought on couples to talk about their journey, I thought I knew Jishnu, right? And Jishnu was so fun. I had a pre-recording chat with him and he was very open. He and his wife Shreya were like, yeah, definitely, let's do this. We had sent them a couple of our older episodes. So they came prepared, right? And then once we hit record, the side of Jishnu I saw, let me be honest, he was the same Jishnu, but we saw different stories from him, different things about him. I mean, I learned so much about his music that I'd been listening to for years, right? Just the inspiration behind it. And yeah, that was really, really fun.
So, fun fact for our listeners, when we started recording the episode with Jishnu, he was awfully quiet for the first 10 odd minutes, and it was a wife who was speaking, and we found it so surprising because we've had multiple calls before the recording and he was such a jovial guy and we were like, oh my God, why is he so quiet? And after 10 minutes he suddenly sprung into action and he was like, guys, sorry, I was a little quiet because my father-in-law was hanging out and I couldn't talk about my relationship with my wife in college. And we were like, we had such a hearty laugh. And also, Peter, he sung a song for us on that episode.
Yeah, that was the first time we had music actually performed on the podcast. So that was really cool. But we've talked about the fun episodes. We've talked about the episodes that we want everyone to listen to. Now, this one's personal. One thing I've realized, Nadir, is that, while we're doing these episodes, Nadir, we always place emphasis on what the listener is going to learn from it, right? Like what's the takeaway going to be from them? And that's always at the outset of when we are preparing the episodes. But indirectly, what also happens is we end up learning a lot, right? I mean, I'm sure you can agree in the last 45 episodes, I'm sure if we have to do, there's one takeaway from each episode that we can take for each of us personally in our lives. So again, if I have to put you to the task, what's an episode you learned the most from personally?
So, from a takeaway standpoint, right? Obviously, every episode has its own highlights, but from a personal takeaway standpoint, I think for me, the finance episodes, the one with Mrinal, where he spoke to us about investments in different instruments, especially for our children, for our parenting journey, looking at long-term retirement, so on and so forth. I think that was very, very interesting. And it came not just from a financial expert, but also a financial expert who's a parent. So it wasn't that he was trying to sell us certain things, but he was trying to tell us that, listen, this is perhaps the right way of doing it. And I thought that was very interesting. And the other gentleman Sandeep, who's had so much global experience and international experience in managing finance and everything, came up with his own app of teaching children how to manage and handle their own finances, which I thought was very interesting because it gives you a very different perspective as to as and when you start giving allowance and pocket money to your kids, what is it that you need to do? Because the whole underlying message of let the children realize the importance of earning from a young age, I thought that hit me really hard, and I'm definitely going to put it in practice when my kid grows up. What about you, Peter?
For me, there's so much I can talk about, but one episode I really learned from was the one with Rajat Mittal, and where we talked about challenging gender stereotypes, right? I mean, everyone's kind of heard this before, but I'm just going to repeat it. Like, I grew up in a house where, there was no difference between my cousins who were girls and me. We were all kind of treated equally. Same with my siblings and me. But to hear from Rajat, right, and from someone who didn't grow up in a metro city, who had to kind of do those stereotypical things, right? That, he had to do the engineering because that's what was expected of boys. And just at an age where, he's a parent, and just kind of understanding a completely different perspective, because sometimes I think we take it for granted, right? That, we live in the metros. This is how the rest of India is. Just getting that different perspective. And not only that, how do you create awareness about it? I think that was really cool, because it took that moment for him to kind of get comfortable, gain confidence, and then spread the awareness about it. Because can you imagine how many more people were thinking just like him or continue to do so, right? Now, maybe through his platform, Boyish, more people can just get aware and kind of not say that, this is a profession only for boys, this is a profession only for girls. So I think that was an episode that I really learned a lot from.
I completely agree. And I believe he's launching 3 books on children, and I'm sure they must be having a lot of interesting stories for parents as well as kids.
Yeah, definitely. So I think maybe it's time we call him back again on the podcast. But yeah, so do check out boyish.in, or I think on social media also. Rajat's working on 3 books which he's launching early next year. Definitely something to check out.
The episodes are episode 65, which is with Mrinal Ghosh, episode 73 with Rajat Mittal, and episode 78 with Sandeep. So, Peter, we've spoken about numbers, we've spoken about our personal favorites, we've spoken about our learning journey, our learning curve, and the different types of people who have shown confidence of telling their stories on our platform specifically, right? And that's great. But what do you think our listeners should look forward to in 2022?
Nadir, I think you'll remember very well, around 6 months or so ago, we were having this conversation about the future of popsinapod, right? Because we knew we were going to reach 100 episodes. We constantly have these calls every month or so that, okay, what are we doing next month? And things like that. And I felt, parenting, and that's what we realized in the episodes we did with, Danish Aslam and Shruti Seth, Jishnu Das Gupta and Shreya also, in there, that, parenting is a lot more beyond just taking care of the kids, right? It's also about self-care. That's why we did the episodes on mental health. But it's also about the relationship between your partner and you. And that's where something I realized that we should really focus on. So one of the things we did was, if you go back to episode 92, we thought, hey, why don't we kind of get a peek into what relationship and dating is like in the digital age, right? Because you and I had no idea. Like, we didn't know forget the apps, we didn't know half the terms that kids use these days, right? And I'm using the words kids very judiciously, but we had no idea, right? So I think that's definitely something our listeners should look out for in the next year. More episodes on relationships, because I think if you look back and if you look at our journey of parenting, right, it's that relationship that you have with your partner that impacts your kid, right? That also helps you make your life either easier or harder. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely, Peter. I completely agree with you, because I think when people think relationship on a broader level, and I don't mean to disrespect anyone, but the term relationship is automatically associated with romance, right? But it's so much more. And we also did that episode with Seema, where she spoke about how your relationship changes after you're getting married, right? So it's not just romance, and it's not just, digital apps and how do you find your partner. I think that's the easy part. It gets, I wouldn't say tough, but it's literally a partnership where both are equal components, the spouses or the partners or whatever it is. How do you maintain that? And that's, I think, very important. And my God, I think there are a lot of stories over there, Peter. Like today, the dynamics are changing. The way companionship works, that is changing. And I really am looking forward to some interesting people, hopefully couples also maybe, to come out and talk to us about their relationships on popsinapod.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we 2 years ago, or in the last couple of years, looked into first work from home. Now we're talking hybrid, right? And one thing about relationships are things are constantly changing, right? You cannot say that, hey, this is how it worked for my parents, so that's how it will be for me. Or this is how it worked for my partner and I when we were dating or when we first got married. And that's the thing about relationships. You have to kind of work at it. So, yeah, that's something I definitely think our listeners should keep an eye out.
On that note, Peter, I think it's a good way to end. It's the end of the year. It's the end of a difficult 2021. And we are now looking forward to 2022 with more stories on relationships, on parenting, some interesting parents who can probably come and talk to us about their journeys. And on that note, if you know somebody or if you have an interesting story, then we urge you that you reach out to us and you tell us your stories. You can write to us on popsinapod@gmail.com.
Or just hit us up on social media. Just search Pops in a Pod on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever platform we're there. Honestly, Nadir and I have already started planning our episodes for Jan, so definitely get in touch and who knows, maybe you could be a part of one of our episodes.
And that's it from us, and we are hoping to see you next year. A great end to 2021, and hopefully we'll get you some very, very cool stories to listen to. So stay safe and have a great holiday season.
Yeah, happy holidays everyone. See you next year.